Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to introduce two new words when it comes to functions. The two words are domain and range. And I want to keep this very simple. The domain is all the x values of your points, of every possible point on your line, every possible point in the equation or the expression or the graph or the list of points. All the x values, just the x values, are domain. So domain is the x values. The y values are considered the range. All possible y values of your points are your range. So for this particular problem, when it says what is the range of this function, we're not talking range like when we talked about how the largest number minus the smaller. That's not what we're talking about. It's actually every single y value possible. So we start at the bottom and we work our way up. So I work my way up along the y-axis until I find a point that matches this y value of -1. That tells me my first range value is -1. Then I put a comma in here, and then I continue going up the y-axis till I find my next y value. But what's my y value? It's 0. So my next y value would be 0. This point has a y value of 0. And I continue up my y-axis. Now, what's nice or interesting is we do not need to do repetition. In other words, both of these points have a y value of 4. We only need to type that in once. We don't need to repeat it and say there's 2 4s in the range. All we're saying is 4 is in the range. So I have a y value of -1, a y value of 0, and a y value of 4. 3 y values in my range. Now this one says, what is the domain? Now remember, the domain, if you need to go back and review that, just make sure you write it down if you need to write it down, because it kind of erased it all. But the domain are the x values. So all I'm going to do is I literally look right down the column of x values in my points, and that's my range. Try to get in the habit of always writing them from smallest to greatest. So there'd be a -5, comma, a -1, comma, and a 10. Those are my 3 x values that are in my domain. Domain are x, range are y. So again, to find my range, because now it's asking for range here, I go up along the y-axis until I see a point that's across from this y value of 0. So my first range value is 0, comma. Then I continue on up this y-axis, and I have 2 points that have a y value of 4. So I don't need to do the repetition. I just need to say, hey, I have points that have a y value of 4. And then the last point as I move on up is a y value of 5. Because remember, range are the y values. Again, here's domain. I'm hoping we get to a graph that it asks for, like this one, domain. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the x values. I start at the left and I work along here until I can see up and say, oh, look, that point has an x value of -2. So my first domain is -2, comma. And then I continue working along the x-axis until I can see another point that lines up with the x-axis at an x value of 0. So my next one would be 0, comma. Then I continue moving my way along the x-axis. And I look down here and I have a point that lines up with an x value of 1. So that would be my next domain value. And then I continue along the x-axis until I find my next point, which has a x value of 2. And then I continue along my x-axis until I find the next point that lines up with an x value of 3. Make sure you put in your commas, comma, and then the last point obviously has an x value of 5. Looks like I didn't put a comma in there, I put a K. I meant to do a comma, and then 5. And I submit. Okay, so again, here's range. Now let's do this one. Range is our y values. So I look down the column of y values, not my x values. And it looks like they didn't put these in order. Again, I highly recommend you learn to do them in ascending order. So I did the -8. Next one I see would be 0. So I'm going to do comma 0, point, comma 0. Then the next one is 13. It's the next one in ascending order. So then I do 13. And then I do 16, 18, and 20. So I'm going to do 16, 18, and 20. Now, if there had been a repetition, like say 18 had been done twice, you wouldn't need to put 18 in twice. You'd only need to put it in once. Make sure you're doing commas and not periods, and you will have no problem with this lesson. Again, range, you work up along the y-axis and find all the y values that go with each of these points. Domain, you work along the x-axis. If you have any questions on this, please do bring them to class. But again, just remember those two words, domain and range. Domain are all x values, range are all y values.